What's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today I want to do my recap of UFC 310. In my opinion, this card was pretty good. I was really excited going into this card. I know a lot of people weren't that hyped going into UFC 310, but I thought it played out very, very well. There was a lot of really good fights, a lot of competitive fights on the card, and I kind of want to just break down everything that happened in this event. There were some absolute robberies. The judges' scoring was a little bit wonky in this one. There were some very close decisions. Like I said, some incredible fights to be seen, and genuinely, I could not wait to kind of talk about this with you guys. So if you guys enjoy the UFC content, please have a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help the channel grow. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications. But let's jump right into the reaction. UFC 310, December 7th. Let's talk about everything top to bottom. Okay, so starting with the first fight on the card, or the main event, let's say, Alexandre Pantoja's second round submission by rear naked choke over Kai Asakura. Now, I'm going to be honest, Kai Asakura looked pretty good, but he did not look like one of those top staple flyweights in that division. I would still take Brandon Royval over him, and maybe even someone like Kai Kara-France, Amir Albazi. I think that he's on the level of like those mid-tier guys. So like talking about a more comparable matchup would have been someone like Amir Albazi, but Alexandre Pantoja is one of the best fighters in the world. He has gone in there and absolutely killed so many different guys. He got that rear naked choke off so fast, and genuinely, I think that Pantoja needs to be up inside the top 7 probably of the best pound for pound fighters in the UFC. I mean, he has lapped his division right now. I think his next fight, should be someone like Brandon Royval, but I don't know exactly. I'm going to make another video talking about the future of the matchups going into and after UFC 310, but really, I do really love Alexandre Pantoja. I think he's such a good fighter. And Kai Asakura has such a good style and such a fun style inside the UFC flyweight division. I didn't know much about him. I knew that he was kind of going to go in there and do different things and whatnot, but I really liked his style. Some of those flying knees that he was hitting Pantoja with were some strong knees, but Pantoja eats those for breakfast. I really look at this fight, see Pantoja's dominance kind of squaring off, and I think that Pantoja is eventually going to get a shot at the UFC bantamweight title. But right now, I think that was a great win for Pantoja, something that he knew he could go in there and do, something that I was fully confident in seeing Pantoja go in there and do, but really, I think that was a great performance by Alexandre Pantoja, and if you're Kai Asakura, I would not be deterred one little bit, because that's easily the toughest flyweight out there. Now, in the co-main event was Ian Machado Garry versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. Now, this was such a close fight. I had the fight going 48-47 towards Shavkat. At the end there, I texted a couple friends, and I was like, I got Ian Garry winning this one. I don't know why. I just had a feeling that Ian Garry was going to go in there and really bust up Shavkat just because he doesn't move his head. But as I was watching the fight, Shavkat was moving his head a lot more, which was something that I was very, very happy to see, because I think Shavkat's deficit, especially in that Jeff Neal fight, was he kept his head on a linear line, and he was getting absolutely blasted by Neal for this one. But Ian Machado Garry has shown me that he is one of the best fighters inside the UFC welterweight division. I didn't know how good he truly was, and I possibly was going to pick him to win this fight. And like I said, I thought that this fight would have been really close, and it was. And I think that's something that Shavkat really just shows that isn't this unworldly monster who's going to go in there and finish everyone. He's just a normal UFC fighter, as much as we like to say. He's 19-0, 18 finishes, 1 decision. That's Ian Machado Garry. But the striking looking at this is actually kind of crazy. It was 65 to Shavkat, 102 to Ian Garry. So Ian landed about 40 more strikes than Shavkat. Two takedowns to Shavkat, 1 to Ian Garry. Sub attempts for Garry. Oh my God, I almost lost it when Ian Garry had that rear naked choke in the 5th round. I was like shaking watching that. That was absolutely insane. And I thought he had it for a second, just to see Shavkat's face, to see him in that position. He looked so fearful in every little thing. I was like, oh my goodness, Shavkat is like, he has no idea how he got in this position. Ian Garry working with Charles Oliveira is probably the best move he could ever make inside the UFC. He's already a top striker in the organization, let's say top 15. But him going in there and working with Oliveira, it really shows that Ian Garry wants to learn, and he's that moldable piece of clay that he can go in there and do whatever he needs to do in order to get better. In significant strikes, Ian Garry 42 to Shavkat 37. And these odds I'm looking at right now is minus 375 to plus 295 in this fight for Shavkat over Garry. And really, I just could not see that happening. And Ian Garry has proven to me that he 100% needs to fight up in the rankings. This fight does nothing other than rise the stock of Ian Garry. And I think a lot of people are going to sit here and say, oh, Ian Garry, did this, he lost the fight. But really, this fight for Ian Garry should push him up in the rankings, kind of like Khalil Roundtree Jr. against Alex Pereira. This fight really shows me that Ian Garry is going to be one of the most resilient guys inside the UFC welterweight division. And he's going to have some hard fights in front of him, namely some really good grapplers who are up in that top 5 in the UFC division. But really, Ian Machado Garry has done an incredible job. Now, Shavkat, on the other hand, Shavkat definitely has some holes in his game that were completely exploited. And seeing this going down against Ian Garry and against Belal Muhammad, I think Belal could actually run through Shavkat. I don't think that Shavkat's going to be able to deal with the pressure of Belal, but I also think he's going to be able to piece him up on the feet in some regards. I don't think Shavkat's this unworldly striker that we've never seen. And I think that in this fight with Garry, now it's either one of two things. Shavkat is that good and Ian Garry is just on his level, or Shavkat just was never that good to begin with. And, I look at Shavkat and I see that he's got a lot of things to work on, especially if he goes in there and fights Belal, because Belal is a specialist in the grappling department. Belal's stand-up isn't that diverse, isn't that good, but if Shavkat can go in there and really piece him up on the feet and do stuff like that and really be able to defend against the takedown, I think he's going to benefit a lot from that and possibly even smoke Belal Muhammad. But in this fight, Shavkat versus Ian Garry, one of my favorite fights of the year, to be honest. I know it was kind of a clinch fest to start, but that 5th round alone where Garry got that rear naked choke almost sunk in was absolutely crazy, and I just love to see these two go out there and fight. This is the future of the welterweight division. These guys will 100% see themselves fight again in the future, and I cannot wait to talk more about the future of Ian Garry and Shavkat Rakhmonov. Now, the featured bout was an absolute robbery. Ciryl Gane won the fight, and 100% Alexandre Volkov should have won that bout. Volkov looked incredible in there. The way he was able to use his length finally against someone like Ciryl Gane. Gane is someone who always looks massive in there because of how jacked he is and whatnot, but he looked like a shrimp compared to Alexandre Volkov. And absolutely, I think Volkov won the fight 29-28. Gane won the first round, Volkov won the second round, and Volkov won the third round. There really wasn't that much just judge in the third round rather than position, and Volkov had it the entire round. Ciryl Gane is a great fighter. He had an excuse that he said that, he broke his toe and then he really couldn't go in there. But this was an absolutely devastating performance for Ciryl Gane's career. This dropped his stock a ton. And like I said, kind of like the Khalil Roundtree Jr. fight, this only boosts Alexandre Volkov. And I wouldn't be surprised if the UFC gave Volkov the title shot coming off a loss, because he 100% won this fight. There is no way you can tell me that Alexandre Volkov didn't win this. Ciryl Gane literally walked out of the cage prior to getting the interview because he thought he lost the bout. Alexandre Volkov's face when it happened was crazy. Joe Rogan's face was crazy when it happened. Dana White went over to to Volkov saying the judges screwed you. This was an absolute robbery of a fight. One of the biggest robberies I can see in recent memory. Volkov 100% went in there and won the fight, and it wasn't really even close in my opinion. But truly, I don't know what to say about Ciryl Gane. He's got to improve a lot more inside the grappling department because Volkov isn't like this otherworldly wrestler. And if we see Ciryl Gane struggling with Volkov, he's going to get absolutely mauled by Tom Aspinall. But ultimately, Alexandre Volkov won this fight. No doubt in my mind. I 100% could see him go out there and beat someone like Ciryl Gane, and he would easily be the tougher challenge for Tom Aspinall over Gane because he's more well-rounded. Ciryl Gane has such a massive hole in his game. He looked better technically on the ground, but ultimately I think that Volkov would be a tougher opponent for Tom Aspinall. Now, another fight on the main card, Bryce Mitchell versus Kron Gracie. This fight wasn't even that exciting. Bryce Mitchell was just taking down Kron Gracie in that first round by will. Kron Gracie in the second round almost had an armbar attempt. It was kind of cool. I mean, it wasn't anything crazy. Bryce Mitchell kind of got out of it. But in that third round, Bryce Mitchell slammed Kron Gracie, kind of stunned him really hard, and then he hit him with a massive elbow, knocking him out. Bryce Mitchell getting the third round KO. Bryce Mitchell, I think, is a very good fighter inside that featherweight division. I think he fights up in the rankings. I don't know who he should fight next. I think that there's a bunch of guys above him in that really should go and see whether Bryce Mitchell should fight next. I think that he could possibly be a top 5 fighter in the lightweight in the featherweight division. I think he's that good, but I don't know how he's going to translate against the best of the best inside of the featherweight division. I think that this was a good win. I think Kron Gracie's an awful mixed martial artist. I think he's a great Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, but you put him in there with someone like Bryce Mitchell who has the grappling. He's got everything that you could ever possibly go against. I think that this is an absolute mismatch for Kron Gracie. Gracie. But Bryce Mitchell looked great. I think he should fight someone possibly in the top 10, top 7, and I think that he can move on and possibly be a top 5 featherweight eventually. Now, Duhoi Choi went out there and absolutely bodied Nate the Train. I mean, Nate the Train looked completely lost out there. I mean, Duhoi Choi, I didn't have much to say about this fight, really. I thought Nate the Train would go in there and win. He had more experience than Duhoi Choi, in my opinion. He's been in those barn burners before, but Duhoi Choi went out there and absolutely outclassed Nate the Train. 114 significant strikes, or total strikes to 32, and 78 significant strikes to 25. Takedowns, Duhoi Choi had 4 to Landwehr 0, and genuinely he won start to finish, ultimately getting the 3rd round stoppage because Nate the Train couldn't do anything. He was so drained of energy, and Duhoi Choi went in there and did the best thing possible. I think you give Duhoi Choi a top 15 fighter inside the featherweight division, maybe someone like Dan Ige, but ultimately I think that the this UFC featherweight bout was absolutely one-sided to Choi, and Nate Landwehr got absolutely outclassed. Now, in the featured bout of the UFC prelims, Dominic Reyes beat Anthony Smith, and this was such a sad fight to see. Dominic Reyes, 172 total strikes to Anthony Smith, 24, but I think that this had a lot more implications with Anthony Smith's best friend who recently died, and his coach who was in his corner for every single one of his fights other than one. You know, Anthony Smith walked into the octagon, he was bawling, crying. After the fight, he was bawling, crying, said that this was probably his last one, and I just don't think that he was in that mindset to go in there and ultimately fight with Dominic Reyes. I thought he could go in there and push through, but really Reyes just showed that he, one, had no mercy, thank God, because I think that this is Reyes' job. He got to go in there no matter what the situation and circumstance is to go in and defeat his opponent, but Reyes went in there and absolutely dominated Anthony Smith, and I hope this is Smith's last one because it's not going to get easier as time goes on, considering that, you know, you have associated someone of this stature of your best friend with your MMA career, and him not being able to do this fight in this caliber and getting walloped so hard by one side, you know, it just shows me that Anthony Smith's career is probably done. And that isn't something that I want to say lightly because I'm a massive Anthony Smith fan. I think he's a great guy, but ultimately if he can't do this against Dominic Reyes and the emotions are going to get the best of him, I truly think that he's got to end his UFC career just to kind of move on with some other things. Vicente Luque is back. He went in there and got the Anaconda choke in the first round, like 45, 50 seconds into the first round, the fastest Anaconda choke in UFC history. Now, I really picked Themba Gorimbo because I saw, you know, Vicente Luque's last fight. I think it was his last fight against Joaquin Buckley at UFC Atlantic City, and he looked completely lost in there. I don't know what he was doing with Joaquin Buckley, especially in that second round where he got pushed to the floor by Buckley. It looked like he just gave up, and that's never a good sign for the fighter. I thought the brain hemorrhage from Jeff Neal was really something that has been weighing on him. But in this fight, Themba Gorimbo was looking pretty good, looking stand up, you know, and Vicente Luque jumped on an Anaconda choke, cinched that thing up so tight, and he went in there and absolutely bootied Themba Gorimbo. And that was something crazy to see because I didn't have Luque really standing a chance in this fight. And that was something pretty nice to see. You know, I think Luque, I don't think he's going to be this prominent figure within the welterweight division. I think welterweight is very good right now. But I do think that he could push himself back into the top 10, possibly beating some of the guys like Jeff Neal again or someone like that. But Luque, very good fighter, very good win. And Themba Gorimbo is going to kind of have to go down in competition because this was such a one-sided match. Now, in a very close fight, Movsar Evloev beats Aljamain Sterling. Do I agree that this was the correct decision? I'm going to say no. I thought Aljo edged out Evloev ever so slightly, but I 100% see how Evloev won this fight. You know, I look at Aljo in that third round, and I kind of say that he had more kind of time. His kind of stuff that he was doing was out doing Movsar Evloev in that one, but ultimately, Movsar looked really good in there. These two are some of the best UFC featherweights out there. This should have 100% been on the main card. I don't know why this wasn't, because this was one of the highest level grappling fights I have ever seen inside the UFC. Evloev was absolutely throwing Sterling around, but then Sterling was throwing Evloev around. It was such a fun fight to see these guys' reversals on one another and all the different type of stuff that they were doing. What's crazy is Evloev outlanded Sterling 136 to 45 on the total strikes. But in the significant strikes category, Sterling outlanded Evloev 12 to 8, which just shows there was a bunch of pitter-patter on there, and that this was really just a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu wrestling match. But I thought Sterling, especially with those power bombs and everything that he was doing, controlling the different positions, beat Movsar Evloev. But it was a very close fight. Evloev probably deserves a title shot next after this win. This fight wasn't like, an absolute robbery like Alexandre Volkov versus Ciryl Gane. It was a very close fight, and either way, I would have been content with the winner, but Evloev should get a title shot next. I don't know if the UFC is going to do that, and if not, they should possibly give him someone like Max Holloway if he's staying inside the UFC featherweight division, or if Diego Lopez wants to fight Evloev, I think that would be another good rematch. But ultimately, I think that these two are some of the best UFC featherweights out there, and I think Sterling should get someone even a little bit above him, maybe like Josh Emmett or someone like that. Randy Brown versus Bryan Battle, a fight that I thought was going to be a tiny bit different. There was so much clinch work in this fight, and Bryan Battle ended up winning the split decision. I guess Bryan Battle won the fight. It was kind of hard to see. Randy Brown definitely won the first round. I think Bryan Battle won the second round, and the third round was very, very close as well. The reason I say I think Bryan Battle won the second round is, like I said, there wasn't anything dominant in this fight that really showed me that Bryan Battle was like leaps and bounds ahead of Randy Brown. That first round by Randy Brown was easily the most dominant round of the fight, in my opinion. I know Bryan Battle did a lot of clinch work, but in that third round, he kind of went in there, and it was a very close fight. Total strikes 35 to Battle, 30 to Randy Brown, 24 significant to Brown, and 21 to Battle. Like I said, I think that this was a very close fight. I'm not another thing like Movsart and Sterling. If Randy Brown would have won it, I wouldn't have been opposed. But Bryan Battle was a very good fighter. I hate what he got on and said about the fans after calling them the degenerates, which is crazy. But Bryan Battle missed weight by 4 pounds. Also, he didn't put on a barn burner of a fight, which is what I thought this fight was going to be. I thought it was going to be absolutely crazy, and I thought that this was going to be a back and forth affair. But ultimately, Bryan Battle has shown me that he can kind of beat the UFC, welterweight staples. Randy Brown, no matter if he's ranked or not, is a UFC welterweight staple. He is really good, in my opinion. He's only taken on the toughest test: Bryan Battle, Jack Della Maddalena, Muslim Solikov, all those guys. But really, Randy Brown, still a very good fighter in the welterweight division, but I think you give Bryan Battle top 15 opposition next. I'm going to kind of speed through the UFC prelims. Chris Weidman looked like he needed to retire against Eric Anders. Eric Anders went in there and absolutely beat him bell to bell. In that first round, I think Weidman did win, but Eric Anders was just absolutely laying those ground and pound hammer fists on him incredibly fast. Joshua Van absolutely destroyed Cody Durden in an incredible technical match. Durden looked good in that first round, but Joshua Van kind of went out there and started piecing him up over and over and over again to ultimately get the decision win. Michael Chiesa, first person to ever submit Max Griffin. Absolutely insane to see, because Michael Chiesa is one of the last specialists inside the organization. Took down Max Griffin time and time again, and ultimately in that third round got the hooks in and automatically cinched in that rear naked choke to get an incredible submission win over Max Griffin. Clay Guida kind of needs to retire at this point. He's 44 years old because he got absolutely armbarred by Chase Hooper. Chase Hooper is an incredible grappler. He has a bunch of different submissions inside the UFC. I think it's 4, and every single submission has come by a different way. One armbar, one rear naked choke, etc., etc. But Chase Hooper definitely needs to fight someone above him. He's a very good UFC featherweight. Even though he's so young and has a baby face, he is so good. And Kennedy Nzechukwu beats Brzezinski in the first round. And Kennedy is, ever since moving up to heavyweight, has 100% improved his career. I think he really couldn't take a shot at UFC light heavyweight because of how big he was. But now that Nzechukwu is in the UFC heavyweight division, I think he's going to be a prominent staple for a lot of years to come. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know what you think about UFC 310 as a whole. What did you think about the main event? Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Asakura, the co-main event, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Ian Machado Garry, and the decision going to Ciryl Gane over Alexandre Volkov. Ultimately, I thought that this was a very good card to watch. I was very intrigued and excited to see it, considering that these guys are some of the best UFC fighters in the respective weight classes. This card didn't have like that prominent name on it, with Alexandre Pantoja being your main event. He's an incredible fighter, but not a lot of guys would understand how good he is. But that Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry fight was incredible. The Ciryl Gane versus Alexandre Volkov fight was incredibly close. Vicente Luque's choke over Themba Gorimbo was insane. Movsart versus Aljo was one of my favorite fights of the year, considering the technical grappling ability of it. And Bryan Battle versus Randy Brown was a little bit of a disappointment, but still a very good fight. Ultimately, I'm going to make a video pretty soon here talking about who these guys should fight next after UFC 310. But for right now, I'm happy with the card. I think it was a very good one and very underrated card. And I can't wait for the UFC to come back next weekend, UFC Tampa, and ultimately start back up in 2025. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. Please have a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy the UFC content. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications, just so you guys are always notified about UFC content releasing every single day. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.